Every morning at 6:30, Lena Whitford set the kettle on the iron stove in the bunkhouse kitchen, and every morning at 6:30, she heard the same sound from across the yard, the slow, deliberate creak of the barn door swinging open, followed by boots on hard ground. She had been at the Granger Ranch for 11 days before she learned his name. She had not come looking for work. She had come because there was nowhere else to go. Her aunt in Medicine Hat had died in February. 3 weeks after Lena arrived, on the overnight coach from Calgary, and the house had been sold to pay the debts before the ground had even thawed enough for a proper burial. The solicitor had been kind about it, in the way that men are kind when they are delivering news that requires no kindness from them at all. He had given her a list of farms along the river road that were known to take on help in the spring, and she had folded it into her coat pocket and walked out into the cold. She found the Granger place on a Thursday. The sign at the gate was weathered down to nothing. The letters so faded, she almost missed the turn entirely. But there was smoke coming from the chimney of the main house, and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with her feet. The woman who answered the door was stout, with flour on her apron and a measuring look in her eye that Lena recognized as the look of someone who had been disappointed before and had decided to be disappointed again before she was proved wrong. "Mrs. Elspeth Granger?" Lena said. "Who's asking?" "Lena Whitford. I was told you might need help in the kitchen. I can cook, and I can clean, and I don't eat much." Mrs. Elspeth Granger looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in, then. I'll put the tea on." The work was not difficult, though it was relentless. There were 4 ranch hands to feed 3 times a day, a root cellar that needed organizing, and a wood box that never seemed to stay full no matter how many times she stacked it. Mrs. Granger was not unkind, but she was not warm either. And she ran the house the way a captain runs a ship, with complete authority and very few explanations. It was on Lena's 4th morning that she first saw him properly. She had been outside shaking the breakfast cloth free of crumbs when the barn door opened and he came through it, leading a gray horse by the bridle. He was taller than she expected. Tall and broad through the shoulders, with the deliberate movements of a man who had done the same things for so many years that his body simply knew the way. His coat was dark with wear at the elbows, his hat tilted against the wind that came off the flats, and when he paused in the yard to check something on the horse's foreleg, he crouched with the ease of a much younger man. He did not look up. She went back inside. "Who is the man with the gray horse?" she asked Mrs. Granger that evening. "That's Everett." Mrs. Granger did not look up from her mending. "My husband's foreman. He's been here longer than anyone." "What's his surname?" "Thorne." She bit through a thread. "Everett Thorne. He doesn't say much, but he does everything right. You won't find a better one." Lena filed this away and said nothing more. Everett Thorne did not, in fact, say much. In the 11 days she had been at the ranch, he had spoken to her exactly 3 times. Once to say thank you when she brought coffee to the men working the fence line. Once to ask if the bread was wheat or rye. She had answered wheat, and he had nodded as though this was precisely the information he had needed. And once, at the end of the 2nd week, when she had been struggling to lever the lid off the salting barrel and had not heard him come up behind her, he had simply reached past her and done it. And when she turned to thank him, he had already started back toward the barn. She stood there for a moment, with the lid in her hands, and the smell of salt and cold meat rising into the spring air. There was something about him that she could not quite name. It was not that he was unfriendly. He was not, he said. "Good morning," when their paths crossed. And once he had redirected 2 of the younger hands when they made a noise outside the kitchen window that was keeping her from hearing herself think. Though she hadn't asked and hadn't known he'd noticed. It was more that he seemed to exist in a kind of deliberate quiet, the way certain rivers run deep and don't make much sound. And it took Lena longer than it should have to understand that what she had taken for indifference was actually something closer to attention. She understood it the morning the roan mare got loose. It was early May by then, warm enough that the mud in the yard was beginning to firm up, and Lena had gone to the cold store before breakfast for the week's butter. She was on her way back when the roan came around the corner of the barn at a full run, stirred up by something. A dog, or a noise, or nothing at all, as horses sometimes are. And Lena had exactly 1 second to decide whether to drop the butter and run, or stand still and hope. She stood still. She closed her eyes. She heard a voice say, quietly, "Easy now." And then the sound of the horse slowing, and then the creak of the gate being drawn closed. She opened her eyes. Everett Thorne was standing between her and the gate, his hand on the roan's neck, looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. "You all right, Miss Whitford?" It was the first time he had used her name. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. He patted the mare's neck twice, then led her back through the gate without another word. Lena carried the butter inside and set it on the kitchen table and stood there for a moment with her hands still on the cloth wrapping. She did not think about him for the rest of the morning. She thought about him for most of the afternoon. The Grangers did not go to church in town. Mrs. Granger had some old disagreement with the minister that Lena never fully understood. Something about a sermon and a christening gift and a matter of principle that had calcified over time into simple habit. But the ranch hands went, or most of them did, loading into the wagon on Sunday mornings and returning in time for the midday meal. Lena went because Mrs. Granger told her she could have Sunday mornings to herself, and because the walk into Aldermore was only 40 minutes, and it gave her somewhere to put her thoughts. The church was small and white, sitting at the edge of town the way a shy guest stands near the door at a party, ready to leave. Inside it smelled of old wood and candle wax and the particular mixture of cold and warmth that old buildings hold in spring, when the walls have not yet made up their minds about the season. She sat in the same place each week, 3rd row from the back, on the right, near the window. She had not chosen it deliberately. She had simply sat down the first Sunday, and there were people on both sides of her, and the service had begun before she could think about moving. And by the second Sunday it had already become hers, in the way that places become yours without your permission. The 4th Sunday, she arrived to find Everett Thorne already seated 2 rows ahead, on the left. She had not known he went to church. She had not known he went anywhere, other than the barn and the fence lines and the far pastures, where she sometimes saw him in the distance, a moving shape against the pale spring sky. He did not look back when she came in. He sat with his hat in his hands and his shoulders very straight, and she could see, from where she sat, the worn collar of his Sunday shirt and the way his hair, which was dark with some gray in it, was combed more carefully than she had seen it during the week. She watched the back of his head through the entire sermon, which meant she retained nothing of the sermon at all, and she was still thinking about this on the walk home when she heard boots on gravel behind her. "Miss Whitford." She turned. Everett Thorne fell into step beside her without ceremony. The way a man does when walking beside someone seems simply logical rather than anything else. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "You walked in?" he asked. "I prefer it." He nodded. They walked for a while without speaking. The road was soft at the edges, and the poplars along the fence line were just beginning to come into leaf, that particular thin green that only lasts a week before it deepens into summer. "It's a long way back," he said. It's not so far, 40 minutes. I know how far it is. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. He looked forward at the road. I know you do, he said. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Lena had learned, over the course of her life, that silences have texture. Some are full of the unsaid, some are simply empty, and some are the kind that feel like the space between one thing and the next, a held breath before a word. Walking beside Everett Thorne felt like the third kind. She was not sure what to do with that. At the gate to the ranch he stopped, and she stopped. "Good afternoon, Miss Whitford," he said. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thorne." He went left toward the barn. She went right toward the house. She told herself it was nothing. The trouble started, if you could call it trouble, in the 3rd week of May, when a man named Douglas Pell. She stopped herself. She had come to think of them that way, events arranged around him, measured by proximity to him, which was a foolishness she recognized and could not seem to stop. His name was not Douglas Pell. His name was Sutton Crail, and he was the younger brother of a rancher from 2 properties over. And he had taken to appearing at the Granger place on the flimsiest of pretexts. A borrowed tool, a question about the road, a calf that had supposedly been seen wandering near the boundary fence. Each time he arrived, he ended up in the kitchen. Each time he ended up in the kitchen, he found a reason to speak to Lena. He was not unpleasant. He was handsome in a loud, easy way, and he knew it. And he said everything with the particular confidence of a man who had never had much reason to doubt that things would go his way. "Miss Whitford," he said one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe while she was rolling pastry, "you ought to come out to the Crail place on Saturday. My brother's wife is having some of the neighbors over. It would do you good to get off this property." "I'm quite all right here, thank you." "I don't doubt it." He smiled. "But an invitation's an invitation." "I'll consider it," she said, which she had found to be the most efficient way of ending conversations without actually ending them. She heard the back door later that afternoon, and then Everett Thorne's voice in the yard, saying something quiet to one of the hands, and then the sound of Sutton Crail's horse leaving at a pace that suggested he had somewhere else to be, after all. She did not ask what had been said, but that evening, when she brought the men's coffee out to the porch, Everett Thorne looked up at her from the step where he was sitting, and there was something in his expression that she had not seen before. Something careful, as though he was doing arithmetic in his head and was not sure yet how it came out. "You don't have to go to anything you don't want to go to," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I know that," she said. He looked back down at his coffee. "I know you do," he said again. She went back inside with the tray and stood at the sink for a minute, looking out the window at the evening light on the yard. She had not meant to tell him about her aunt. It came out one evening in early June, when they were both on the porch by accident. She had come out for the air, and he had been there already, sitting in the old wooden chair by the railing, and it seemed foolish to go back inside, so she sat in the other chair, and they had been quiet together for a while before he said, "You've been here 3 months. Yes, you planning to stay?" She considered this. "I don't know where else I'd go." He said nothing. "My aunt died in February," she said, and then was not sure why she had said it. "In Medicine Hat. That's why I came out here. She was the last family I had." He was quiet for a long time. "My father died 2 winters ago," he said eventually. "He was the last for me too, a brother before that, and before that my mother." He paused. "It's a strange kind of quiet, when there's no one left who knew you as a child." She looked at him. It was the most she had heard him say at once, and he had said it the same way he said everything, slowly, as though the words were things he was setting down carefully, not things he was throwing out. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what it is." The sun was going down behind the line of spruce trees at the far end of the property, and the light was the color of old honey. And somewhere out in the pasture a horse moved, and the grass whispered. "You're good with the work," he said after a while. "Mrs. Granger keeps me busy. I don't mean that." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I mean you're good at the actual work. You don't wait to be told twice. You see what needs doing, and you do it." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and neither did he, and they sat there until the light was gone and the first stars came out over the flats. And then she said good night and went inside. She lay in her room for a long time, looking at the ceiling. She was not, she told herself firmly, going to make a fool of herself over a quiet man who said kind things carefully. She had enough sense for that. She was not entirely sure she believed herself. The problem presented itself in the second week of June. Mr. Hennessy, Gerald Hennessy, the ranch's bank agent in Aldermore, a thin man with careful eyes and a habit of appearing at inconvenient moments, came to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon to speak with Mrs. Granger, and when he left, Mrs. Granger came to find Lena in the kitchen with an expression she had not worn before. She sat down at the table, which she rarely did in the kitchen, and folded her hands on the cloth. "Mr. Granger's note is due in the autumn," she said, "and the cattle prices are not what they were. I want you to know, Miss Whitford, because I think you deserve to know, that I may not be able to keep a full kitchen staff through the winter." Lena set down the pot she was holding. "I see, you're not the last hired," Mrs. Granger said. "I want to be clear about that, but I want you to have time to think about your situation. I didn't think it was right to say nothing." "Thank you, Mrs. Granger. You've done good work here." When the older woman had gone back to the house, Lena stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the yard. The afternoon was bright and ordinary, the chickens going about their business, the barn standing square and patient as it always did. From somewhere out of sight she heard, as she always heard, the creak of the barn door. She told herself she was not going to cry over a job. She had not even had when she arrived in this country. She had her health, and she had her hands, and she had the list of farms from the solicitor in Medicine Hat, which she had never thrown away. She did not take the list out that afternoon. She told herself it was because she was not ready. She did not mean to tell Everett Thorne either. But the following Sunday, walking back from church, he had fallen into step beside her again, so naturally she had stopped noticing it was something that happened and had begun simply expecting it. She said, without entirely deciding to, "Mrs. Granger told me about the banknote." His pace did not change. "I know about it. She said she might not be able to keep everyone through the winter. I know that too." She looked at the road ahead. "I don't have much saved." "I know." She stopped walking. He stopped a step later and turned to look at her. "How do you know?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that means a person is hiding something, but the kind that means they are being careful. "Because I've been paying attention," he said, "since you got here." She looked at him. He looked at her. The poplars moved in the wind. "That's a strange thing to say," she said. "I know. Why have you been paying attention?" He turned his hat in his hands, the same gesture she had seen him make in church, turning it slowly by the brim. "Because I wanted to know if you were going to stay," he said, "and because I couldn't decide if I was going to do anything about it." She was very still. "And have you decided?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face did the thing she had been watching all spring without being able to name it. It settled the way a door settles into its frame when someone finally pushes it all the way closed. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "If you're willing. I've got a quarter section over past the north pasture that my father left me. The house needs work. It's nothing like what you might be used to." She thought of the furnished room she had rented in Calgary. She thought of her aunt's house, cold and already half emptied when she arrived. She thought of the folded list in her coat pocket. "I'm not used to much," she said. "No," he said. "I don't think you are." And something in the way he said it made her understand he did not mean it the way it might have sounded. He meant it as the thing he had spent the spring figuring out and had finally found words for. "I'm not good at saying things," he said after a moment. "I want you to know that before anything else." "I've noticed," she said. The thing that was not quite a smile moved across his face again. "Then you'll know," he said, "that when I say I'd like you to stay, I mean that to mean more than the house needs work and someone to cook." She looked at him for a long moment. The road stretched behind them toward Aldermore and ahead of them toward the Granger gate. And the light was that particular color it got in the late morning of a good June day, pale gold and unhurried. "I know what you mean," she said. He let out a breath. "I'd like to meet with Mrs. Granger," he said. "Before I say anything more, it seemed right to do it properly." "All right." They stood there for a moment, the both of them in the road. "All right," he said. They walked the rest of the way without speaking. But she was aware of him beside her in a way that was different from before. Not the careful awareness of a new place and new people, but something warmer and more certain, like the way you are aware of a fire in a room when you know it will still be there when you come back. At the gate he stopped. She stopped. "Miss Whitford," he said. "Mr. Thorne." He put his hat back on. He looked at her one more time, the way he always looked at things he was memorizing. Then he went left toward the barn, and she went right toward the house. He spoke to Mrs. Granger on Monday evening. Lena did not know what was said. She was in the kitchen, washing up the supper things when she heard his boots on the porch, and then the low sound of voices through the sitting room wall, and then quiet again, and then boots going back across the porch and down into the yard. Mrs. Granger came into the kitchen a few minutes later. She looked at Lena for a long moment, with the measuring expression that Lena had come to understand was not suspicion, but simply the way the woman's face organized itself when she was making a decision. "Everett Thorne is a good man," she said. "He has been on this property since he was 23 years old, and in all that time I have never known him to do a careless thing or say a dishonest word." "Yes, ma'am," Lena said. "He's not a man who speaks easily." Mrs. Granger folded a dish towel with precision. "But he told me tonight, and I don't think he would want me to say this, so I'll only say it once, that he has been watching you since March, and he thinks you are the steadiest person he has ever known." Lena looked down at the water in the basin. "He said that?" "He said that." Mrs. Granger set the towel on the hook. "He also said the quarter section needs a new roof before winter, which is the most romantic thing I have ever heard him say." Lena laughed, and it surprised her. Mrs. Granger's mouth did something that was almost a smile. "He'll be at the barn in the morning," she said, "if you have something to say to him." She went back to the sitting room. Lena finished the dishes. She dried her hands. She looked out the window at the yard, already dark, and at the faint rectangle of light from the barn's side window where someone had left a lantern. She went to bed. In the morning, she was at the barn at 6:30. He was there. He always was. The gray horse was in the first stall, and Everett Thorne was checking the foreleg in the same unhurried way she had seen him do a dozen times, his hands moving with the careful knowledge of long practice. He looked up when she came in. She stood in the doorway with the morning light behind her and said, "I'd like to see the quarter section, if the offer still stands." He straightened up slowly. "Stands," he said. "Then I'd like to see it, before I make any decisions." He nodded. He went to hang the grooming brush on its hook. He came back and stood a few feet from her, and the gray horse regarded them both with the patient indifference of an animal that has seen too much to be surprised. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she said. She went back to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She listened to the yard come awake around her, the hands stirring, the horses moving, the ordinary sounds of a working morning in the good spring light, and she thought that she did not know yet what shape her life was going to take. She thought that this was, somehow, no longer a frightening thing. On Saturday morning, he came to the kitchen door at 8:45. He had his good coat on, and his hat was brushed, and he held it in his hands when she opened the door. "Miss Whitford," he said. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Give me one moment." She untied her apron. She hung it on its hook. She took her coat from the back of the door and put it on, and she stepped out into the morning where he was waiting. The quarter section was 40 minutes' walk to the north, through the long grass, and past the poplar brake, and over the low rise that looked out onto the river bottom. The house was small and needed the roof he had mentioned, and the porch listed slightly to the left. And the kitchen window was cracked and stuffed with rag against the winter's draft that had not been cleared away. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at the low ceiling and the wide plank floor and the iron stove that would need blacking, and the window that framed a piece of sky, so blue it was almost painful. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with the expression she knew now, careful, unhurried, waiting. He had spent the whole walk pointing out things she might not have noticed, the solid foundation, the good well, the way the spruce trees to the north would break the worst of the winter wind. He had said each thing plainly, without dressing it up, and she had understood that this was the only way he knew how to offer something, by showing her all of it, the good and the wanting, and letting her decide. "It's small," she said. "It is. The roof will take some work. I know how to do it." She looked at the cracked window. "That'll need replacing, I know." She looked at him. "All right," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said, and something in him settled the same way she had seen it do once before, on the road after church. Outside, the poplars moved in the early summer wind, and the river was a glint of light in the low distance, and somewhere behind the spruce trees a bird called once and went quiet. She walked to the window and looked out at the land that was going to be hers. The ink stain on her fingers from the morning's accounts was already beginning to fade. By autumn, she thought, it would be replaced by something else entirely. The particular roughness that comes from soil and bread, and the work of making a place your own. She thought she did not mind that at all.